The world's biggest tech companies are in crisis. In just the last week, markets have wiped almost $1 trillion off the valuations of big tech, while companies like Amazon and Meta have lost billions in revenue. Big tech firms were once seen as unstoppable. They are now fighting for their very existence. We ask a few simple questions. First, how did big tech become so powerful in the first place? Second, how did the world's most profitable firms get hit with this present crisis? And third, will it mean the end of big tech as we know it? Technology companies dominated the 2010s like no other industry has before. While the rest of the world was recovering slowly from the financial crisis of 2008, big tech firms like Facebook, Google, Amazon, and Apple grew their revenues and profits by an average of almost 20% every year. For context, major economies like America grew by less than 4% on average during the same period. At the start of 2010, the single most valuable public company in the world was Chinese energy giant PetroChina. Of the top 10 companies in the world by valuation then, only 2 were tech stocks, Microsoft and Apple. Over a decade later, in 2021, every one of the 5 most valuable companies in the world is a tech firm. There were a few key factors behind the success enjoyed by Meta, Google, Amazon, Microsoft, and Apple, which have collectively come to be known as big tech. The first was the massive increase in the number of internet users worldwide, which went from 2 billion users in 2010 to 4.9 billion users in 2021. As technology and connectivity spread across the world, each of these firms took advantage of the internet boom in its own way. Google and Meta made billions from internet advertising, while companies like Amazon and Microsoft launched profitable cloud computing services like Microsoft Azure. Apple became the world's most valuable company after the iconic iPhone redefined the smartphone industry. These companies also tapped into the big data revolution, which allowed them to crunch massive amounts of consumer data to figure out who wanted to buy what and when. In short, big tech has been miles ahead of the competition in using data and the internet to boost revenues. From 2010 to 2019, the world's 5 biggest technology companies saw their combined market value skyrocket from around $1 trillion to around $5 trillion by 2019. These companies seemed unstoppable. When the COVID-19 pandemic broke out, the global economy ground to a halt. Countries suffered and households lost their income, but big tech became richer than ever. Consumers around the world spent their time under lockdown buying products on Amazon, watching shows on Netflix, working on Apple MacBooks, and surfing social media websites like Facebook and Instagram. Advertisers spent billions on digital advertising, which further benefited major tech firms that have always relied on advertising for their revenues. Major countries like America gave their citizens massive handouts, which they turned around and spent on services provided by big tech. Valuations for big tech also continued to increase and hit $7.5 trillion by the end of 2020. By this point, 5 companies had a price tag that was more than double the size of India's economy. However, all of a sudden, everything seems to have changed. In just the last week, these previously dominant companies have lost $8 trillion in value. What happened, you ask? To begin with, major firms saw their revenues decline sharply. Alphabet, Google's parent company, saw a 27% drop in its profits, while Amazon admitted that it was going to miss its revenue projections by a staggering $15 billion. Meta, which is Facebook's parent company, saw its stock drop almost 25% after it revealed that advertising revenues, which are a core part of its business, had dropped worryingly. The crisis in tech became clear, especially to Indians, after Twitter fired thousands of employees globally in a bid to save costs. Elon Musk, Twitter's new owner, revealed that the company was losing close to $4 million a day. Part of the problem here was that the pandemic ended, and with it, the honeymoon period so many big tech companies enjoyed. The global economy reopened, people spent less time indoors and online, while governments stopped handing relief funds to their citizens. All in all, this meant less money for major tech firms. However, big tech's crisis is a bit deeper than some lost revenue. The problem is that the world's largest tech firms have lost their ability to innovate and are over-dependent on particular products. For example, Apple makes more than half of its profits from the sales of the iPhone, a product it designed more than a decade ago. Similarly, Google and firms like it were true innovators in digital advertising. However, when advertisers started reducing the amount of money they spent on digital ads after the pandemic ended, it became clear that Meta and Google had become over-dependent on these revenues. Meta, which owns Facebook and Instagram, recorded its first ever decline in quarterly revenue. Google's advertising business, which has always been a major growth sector for the company, recorded a sharp slowdown in growth this year. Now, the answer out of this crisis seems simple. Big tech firms should simply innovate more. Unfortunately, that is easier said than done. Take Meta, for example. Mark Zuckerberg has bet billions, and maybe even his entire company, on investments in the metaverse, which Zuckerberg believes is tech's next big thing. However, when he finally released the first version of the metaverse, it looked more like a badly designed 2000s video game than a game-changing innovation. Everyone from users and fellow tech CEOs to shareholders slammed Zuckerberg. Meta's augmented reality division, which is designing the metaverse, lost $3.7 billion this year. Last year, it lost $2.6 billion. Meanwhile, Zuckerberg still hasn't figured out how to fix the drop in digital advertising revenues that his company so depends on. Zuckerberg himself has paid the price and has lost over $100 billion from his personal fortune. The point is, innovation is hard, and it seems like big tech has forgotten how to be innovative. Big tech also has major long-term challenges. Firms like Meta, Amazon, and Google are a victim of their own success. They are simply too big to ignore. Their success in the last decade has attracted the attention of governments. Big tech's critics argue that these companies violate user privacy and kill competition from smaller and more innovative firms by acquiring them or excluding them from the market. Amazon, in particular, has been accused of using its power to effectively bully smaller firms. As such, big tech has become too powerful to ignore. India has launched new social media rules to regulate major tech firms, while European regulators have slapped billions in fines on companies like Google for anti-competitive practices. The pressure to regulate and even to break up major tech firms is only going to increase in the coming years. There's no doubt that big tech will manage to survive somehow. These companies retain major strengths, and their products are still among the most respected in the world. However, companies will be forced to find a new normal. Revenues will decrease, government pressure will increase, and the days of sky-high stock valuations will come to an end. The era of big tech dominance may just be over.